What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Seeking Excellence podcast. This is your boy, Nathan Crankfield. And you know that you can get 15% off at tanbooks.com with code Nathan15. And why that's extra relevant today is that today's guest is an author with St. Benedict's Press, which is also Tan Books, which is one of the best Catholic publishing companies of all time, if not the best. And so today's author is Paul Kengor, Dr. Paul Kengor. He is the author of over 20 books. He's a professor of political science at Grove City College and the author of, like I said, over 20 books, but including The Devil and Karl Marx. He's also the senior editor for the American Spectator. Dr. Kengor also wrote the books that are the basis of the new Reagan movie. And so he was really the kind of mind behind it. He wrote books that led to this movie being created, has been instrumental in the process of both raising the money for the movie and actually getting it created. So that's going to be coming out with Dennis Quaid and David Henry and several other big stars here very soon. Oh, actually, it might be out by the time this episode comes out, which is really exciting. But Dr. Kengor, I mean, he might be the most famous guest, or at least one of, that we've ever had on Seeking Excellence. I mean, when I was just preparing for this episode, you could see him on Dan Crenshaw's show. He was on Pints with Aquinas. And I think most importantly for me, being kind of starstruck, is he's been on the Jordan Peterson podcast. So really, really amazing man. Emily's read several of his books. We own, several of his books. But this one that we're going to talk about today, which is The Stigmatists. You've heard me talk about St. Catherine of Siena and just how central she's become to my spiritual life. But he shares some really, really powerful things here about the revelations and warnings that come from some of these holy men and women throughout, especially the 20th century, but going all the way back to, the 14th century with St. Francis of Assisi. Really amazing stuff. And so he's going to get into some of those things. He's going to talk about how optimistic he feels, how not optimistic he feels in certain ways, right? When it comes to some of this stuff and just the things that are happening in our crazy world right now. And so really, really powerful episode. I hope that you'll enjoy it as much as I did, but I highly recommend you go to tanbooks.com and order yourself a copy of The Stigmatists. You really can't overread about the lives of the saints. It's inspiring, it's moving, and if you're here, you're listening to Seeking Excellence, you're somebody who already doesn't want to do the bare minimum. You want to be amazing in life. Reading about the lives of the saints is one of the best ways to do that. It's one of the best ways to go deeper, to be inspired, to be greater, to be more, and to understand suffering on a whole different level, because all of these saints, especially these stigmatists, were open to God's will so much, open to suffering so much, opening to working with God for the redemption of the world so much that they actually bore on their hands, their feet, and their sides the wounds of Christ crucified. That's absolutely amazing. And so I encourage you to read the lives of the saints. He does an amazing job of writing this book in a way that's both challenging and deep, but also very accessible to a beginner reader. And so, again, go to tanbooks.com. Nathan15 will get you 15% off. Without further ado, let's get to this awesome episode with Dr. Paul Kengor. Awesome. Paul, it is so good to have you with me today. Excited to talk about The Stigmatists. What's funny about the book and just the timing of this interview is I'm about halfway through it, but like in the last month or so, probably not the best time, it's not the best bedtime reading, but I've been reading the dialogue of St. Catherine of Siena.
Right.
And so these themes, especially of suffering for the sake of other people and just how redemptive our suffering can really be as Catholics, has been just top of mind for me. And I've just been saying that's kind of been my biggest takeaway from the dialogue. It's just how crazy impactful it can be for us to fast and pray and suffer for other people, for the salvation of other souls, for the advancement of goodness in the world, right? For the growth of the church, for the health of the church, for the leaders of the church. And so I'm very excited to talk about this today. But first, we'd like to just kind of begin with what led you, what was kind of did you have a relationship with St. Padre Pio, St. Francis of Assisi? Like, what was kind of your kickoff to wanting to even kind of go deeper into these wonderful, wonderful saints?
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. It's great to be with you. And of course, Catherine of Siena is my cover girl on the for the book. She's one of my favorites. We had a bunch of really good cover designs for the book. We had artwork of St. Francis. A lot of good artwork on him. And of course, we had photos of Padre Pio, right? And we can talk about that in a little bit. And I remember when I was a Protestant, seeing pictures of this Italian who died in September 1968, not that long ago, and you could see him bleeding from his hands, right? And so we thought about putting Padre Pio on the cover. We kind of felt like that would almost dominate the book. It would seem maybe more about Pio. So then we went through a bunch of different portraits of Catherine of Siena, and the one that's on the front I just love. In fact, my second oldest son Mitch was in Siena a few months ago, and he was sending me pictures. He said, "Dad, here's the actual crucifix where she's receiving the stigmata, right?" And that's what that painting is. You're right. The dialogue of Catherine of Siena, that's not an easy read, right? And
no.
it's
not recommended before bedtime,
right?
For
right.
sure.
Yeah. I do have a habit. It's interesting that you brought up the bedtime reading. I about 10 years ago, I started reading as my bedtime reading lives of saints and stories and biographies of saints, because I found it just to be a good way to go to bed. I mean, my other subjects I've researched: Marxism, Karl Marx, communism, and I would go to bed, ready to jump off the roof of my house, so depressed before I go to bed. And I said, I need something uplifting at the end of the day. So Raymond de Capua's biography of Catherine of Siena is one of the best. I strongly recommend that. In fact, in a way, it's a better read than the dialogues of Catherine of Siena. It's also hard to find a good edition of the dialogues of Catherine of Siena, because a lot of them have been just excerpted, and they've taken out some of the controversial, politically incorrect stuff that Catherine of Siena said, especially about homosexuality and corrupt clergy. And I put all of that in this book. But
well, I got mine from Tan as well, so hopefully we should be set.
right.
With all the goodness.
Yeah, but the way that I got into this, I've always been fascinated by stigmatists, because I mean, to me, if somebody is actually bleeding from his or her hands and feet, and you have, in the cases especially the people I talk about in the book, Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, Sister Elena Aiello, those are two that people don't really know about. Padre Pio, certainly, and a number of others. I mean, they are scrutinized. This is looked at very carefully. If you're watching this and you're not Catholic or an agnostic or a Protestant, and you think, well, Catholic Church, they probably, I know a Catholic down the street who sees the Virgin Mary in her coffee every morning, right? These people call everybody a saint and this and that miracle. No, man, you have no idea. I mean, when I was a Protestant and I learned what devil's advocate is, right, which is like an official person of the Vatican who tries to shoot holes through the canonization process, right, of a potential saint. They go over all of these claims so carefully. They don't want to be misled. They don't want to be duped. And the way that these stigmatists were all just grilled mercilessly, in the case of someone like Padre Pio and Catherine Emmerich. I mean, you get these German scientists, right? These agnostic, hard, rigid German scientists who come in and agnostics, atheists, and they're not ready to believe any of this stuff, right? They're all prepared to see a fake. So by the time that they go through the process, and in some cases, bleeding from their hands for like 50 years, I mean, you don't fake that.
And the ones you talked about in the book that where it would come every Friday, and heal, all within 72 hours, or 48 hours, even come on, bleed, heal, and then the next Friday happen again.
Yeah, so you'll bring in the priest who was at first suspicious, right? And then you bring in the bishop who was at first suspicious. Now they're true believers. And they bring in a new scientist. They bring in a new doctor. They bring in somebody from the Vatican. It's like, I'm telling you, you guys, like clockwork. You just wait and see what happens here. All right, ready. And, she's laying in bed, and then she starts going through this process. And I say she, about 90% of stigmatists have been women.
I thought that was crazy too. I didn't believe there was hundreds of them. I really thought there was only like 7. So that was another thing that was eye-opening for me.
Right. Yeah, and they'll gather around, and like clockwork, it'll start on a Thursday. It'll start on a Friday. It'll 3:00. It'll end, and then when it ends, there's barely any marks, and it's
Right.
completely healed. You can't fake that. All right, you
Right.
can't. That can't be done. That's something clearly miraculous that's happening. So that then for me, people that actually have that stigmata, and then if they're canonized as official saints, and then further, this is for me, Nathan, what really piqued my interest. A lot of them, of course, have written memoirs, made statements, been interviewed, had spiritual biographers, had spiritual counselors, and who've written down their thoughts, their predictions, their
Yeah.
prophecies. That has my attention, because if this lady who's been bleeding from her hands for 50 years is claiming that she's also getting visits from Jesus, from the Blessed Mother, Michael the Archangel, whoever, and they're telling him these things, I mean, I'm all eyes and ears. I want to know what that
Mhm.
person has to say, because that's somebody who has, like, I mean, you talk about like an imprimatur, right? That's This is like an altogether sort of different
Legit.
sign or stamp of approval
You're a
that
doctor of the
has
church
my
and had the stigmata, and you made some
right.
predictions. Yeah, it's worth learning
Exactly.
about.
Exactly. Right. Right.
For sure. Speaking of, so I'm also a convert to the faith, and I really liked in the very beginning you talked about suffering, which I think is a good kind of framework of going into a deeper discussion on it. And one of the things you said that I think is really interesting. So actually, my next solo podcast that I'm going to record is going to be about this, because I had a conversation with a Protestant friend of mine, and she's interested or planning to, it sounds like, to do IVF because she and her husband are infertile. And my whole the title of the podcast is going to be that Christianity is hard, and just reminding people of that. And you did a great job, I think, of summarizing how Catholics approach that and embrace that. And I think we're seeing that kind of fade away, unfortunately. I think
Mhm.
over the last 100 years, even in Catholicism, we have more kind of prosperity minded people. But can you break that down for the audience again, of just saying, why so many Protestants and people in general struggle with, like, why does God let bad things happen to good people? I think you gave some great references there on scripture and just what the church believes about suffering in general, and why God might create stigmatists in the first place.
Yeah, and a number of people have said to me, so the vast majority of these stigmatists have been women, right? I said, yeah, about 90%. And the vast majority have been Catholic. And I'm like, yeah, the vast majority have been Catholic. I mean, probably 98, 99%. And when you consider the theology of Catholics on suffering versus, like, say, health and wealth gospel Protestants, it's pretty
Hmm.
easy to understand, right? I mean, if you're coming from a theological understanding where you don't really get suffering, wow, why does God let bad things happen to good people, right? And I remember we've had this debate many times. I've talked to Protestant friends who say, you Catholics in your church, you've got Jesus there, the corpus on the crucifix. Why?
Hmm.
We have an empty cross because Jesus came down from the cross. It's like, yeah, we know that. We know he came down from the cross. But when you're there at Mass and you're suffering, and you look up and you see that crucified Jesus bleeding, it's like, yeah, I get it. He suffered too. Oh, and he says in the Bible, if you want to follow me, pick up your cross and carry it, right? We're called to
Hmm.
suffer. We're called to suffer too. So it's not really a surprise then that there'd be more Catholic stigmatists than
No.
Protestants, because Protestants wouldn't even get it. Why are you doing this to me? And in many cases, and I walked through this very carefully in the book, I have individual chapter profiles of 7 different stigmatists. And in every case, Nathan, and you can see this, I think in the first chapter, I give common characteristics of stigmatists. And
Hmm.
they include like spiritual anedia, people who don't eat much. In some cases, a few of these stigmatists, the women, lived on nothing but the Eucharist for like 50 years. But another is
So
there
wow.
seem there's this preparatory period of suffering which the Lord seems to be putting them through as kind of a test. So by the time that Catherine of Siena or Saint Faustina receive the stigmata, right, it's already been made clear that they're capable of it. They'll be able to do this. And in the case, I hate to bring this up because everybody finds this dubious. Catherine of Siena and Faustina actually had invisible stigmata, which will be especially hard to convince, right, skeptics of. Most
Right.
of my cases, they're not invisible. I mean, the people were actually bleeding from their hands. But in the cases of Catherine and Faustina, they begged the Lord to keep the stigmata invisible, so people couldn't see it. They didn't feel worthy of it. But Christ prepares them through a period of spiritual preparation to see if they're really capable of carrying that cross and bearing those wounds, and to help join Christ in his suffering for the expiation of the sins of the world. And I know here too, Protestants are going to say, "Are you saying that Christ's suffering on the cross, the atonement on the cross, isn't sufficient?" No, we're not. We're not saying that at all. But just as he calls on us to pray for other people, to pray for sick people, he could heal people on his own. Why does he call on us to pray for people? He could convert anybody who he wanted to. Why do we become missionaries and evangelists? But he's called very special, unique, some have called them living crucifixes, people to enter an altogether higher level of suffering, to join him and help make a difference in reparation for people's sins. This hasn't happened a million times. It probably hasn't happened 1,000 times. There seem to be probably about 400 to 500 cases throughout history that we know of. And we think one of them may have been St. Paul, by the way.
I thought that was cool.
Yeah. The first was St. Francis that everybody knows about. And in fact, September 17th, 2024 will be the 800th anniversary of Francis receiving the stigmata.
Really? Wow.
But in the Bible, St. Paul says, I bear in my hands and body, right, the marks of Christ. I should have the exact quote. I'm misquoting it right now. I don't want to misquote it. It's easy for people to find. Look it up. And some people think that Paul might have been saying there that he actually had stigmata. And a couple of the visionary seers, Anne Catherine Emmerich, and also the other German woman, why can't I think of her name? But they both in their visions claimed to have seen Francis receive the stigmata. And they also claimed, both of them, they both said that they had visions and that Paul was the first stigmatist. Francis was actually the second. That's kind of another neat mystical thing. But Francis is believed historically to be the first, but biblically, Paul was probably the first.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, yeah, great explanation there. And I think that's really essential to one of the differences. I lead a men's group, and we were just kind of talking about that last night. I always say that it's good sometimes to, when you have Protestant friends who will say, well, we all basically believe the same things, right? To say, well, not necessarily, right? And I think the Eucharist is obviously a good one. There's a lot, you can get to a lot of sacraments there, but that really is, I think, another one of them. And I think that, we hear one of my favorite writings or passages from St. Paul is 2 Timothy 4, where he gets into talking about how people are going to have itching ears and find teachers that suit their likeness and teach them the things that they want to hear, right? And I think that you see that in so many ways when people are suffering, whether it's IVF or same-sex attraction, many different things, right, that people might be dealing with, crosses that they might be carrying, like infertility, and they leave the church, or they just reject the church because they say, well, you're not going to let me do what I want to do. But I think we have, and it's difficult, but I think we have beautiful opportunities in those sufferings to offer it up, which is another line that you put in there, as you say, for a lot of Christians, that offer it up doesn't even make sense, right? But can you tell us a little bit about, especially going with St. Catherine, when we're going into difficult times, whether we're suffering physically, emotionally, mentally, whatever it might be, how impactful is our suffering for other people? What should we be offering our pains up for? How do people go about uniting their sufferings with Christ and making it redemptive?
Yeah, it's interesting that, Nathan, the first time that I heard that phrase from a bunch of old Catholic ladies, right, who said, offer it up. And I was first coming into the church, or maybe had first converted. And I said, what does that mean? I had never heard that before. I mean, I had always just heard, why do bad things happen to good people? Why is God doing this to me, right? I'm ready to leave. Well, everybody throughout history has suffered. And now that it's happening to you, you're not going to be a Christian anymore. You became a Christian when it was happening to everybody else, right?
Right.
That phrase, offer it up, it's like a way of saying to God, I'm really suffering here. And I know you've called on us to suffer. Lord, I don't understand how all this works, but can you take this suffering and allow me to share it in a way that helps somebody else somewhere in the world who's suffering? I don't know how that works, God, right? I don't know how that works, but if I'm in this pain and it's just useless for me to be in pain right now, I'm not asking you to take it away, but unite it in some way to something to help somebody, right? So you're kind of offering up that suffering for some sort of, salutary, salvific, if you would, purpose, and that's something that Catholics understand, but health and wealth Protestants don't understand that.
Yeah.
By the
And
way, I
it's
would
so,
add on IVF because I've lectured on this with students before. I teach at Grove City College, and most of my students are not Catholic. A lot of people going into IVF don't realize until it's too late that they have a bunch of frozen embryos that are
mhm.
spare, extra, and then they kind of look at the doctor or nurse and say, "What's going to happen to all of those?" Right?
Yeah,
And then they
seriously.
find out that they're either going to be dissected, used in research, or enter some kind of a permanent, you know, frozen state. Who knows when that will end? I shouldn't use the word permanent, or they will be flushed or
Indefinite,
washed.
we could say. Yeah.
Yeah, and then when they find that out, that's when they think, "Well, I didn't know that, right? I didn't. That doesn't seem right." And scientifically, from a moral perspective, I think when people learn that, that's a wake-up call. Because up to that point, they're thinking, "I'm having trouble with infertility. What's wrong if I get if I get an egg or something?" But they don't realize an embryo. They don't realize what happens with all those excess embryos.
All the side effects. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure. The byproducts. Yeah, it's
the
there's a lot
byproduct.
to that. I think, but what's interesting to me about the suffering, and I was actually thinking about this because I was re-listening to your interview with Jordan Peterson,
Mm,
and the part that I just finished when I was kind of pulling up here back after lunch was you were talking about Marx's, and I don't want to totally derail us. I have there's lots of thoughts, but you've already talked about that a lot out there. But you're talking about Marx's favorite quote, which is something around along the lines of everything that exists deserves to perish.
you nailed it.
Um, and I just thought it was really interesting thinking about the fact that with that, obviously there's people who want destruction and suffering in human life, but the reality, just kind of juxtaposing the two, that everybody is going to suffer. And ultimately, everybody is going to die and pass away, right? This is part of the human experience, is that you're going to suffer regardless. But Catholicism gives you the opportunity to have suffering with meaning, right?
Yeah,
And that the same crosses you're talking about, when you offer it up to the Lord, he could, very similar to what you were talking about earlier, where God's capable of doing everything without us. He still wants you to make that prayer, right? He's still not going to do what he could do with your suffering and, kind of the rewards or the fruits that could come from it. He still wants your heart to be in that position, that disposition, which I think is what the stigmatists display so well. You talked about that with St. Catherine, kind of the tests leading up to it, right? Is how many of those tests have we gotten, you and me, and either passed or failed, right? Where the Lord
right.
wants to do more with us, wants to make us better men, wants to have a deeper impact in our lives and our family, and do amazing things in the lives of other people that we just haven't passed the test. Why? Because our hearts aren't in the right place. We're not actually in a disposition to receive God's grace.
Yeah, and it gets a value out of suffering that would otherwise just seem valueless,
Be
right?
wasted. Yep.
Yeah, wasted. Why am I just sitting here in this pain? Lord, can you do something with this, right? I don't expect you to take it away. You're not going to take it away. So can you use it in some way for the kingdom, right? For
Mm-hmm.
the benefit of souls. And with the stigmatists, that goes to an altogether different level, right? They're not just suffering from a broken leg or a slipped disc or something like that. They're bleeding from their hands and from their feet and from their side. You mentioned the Marx quote: "Everything that exists deserves to perish." I mean, there's nothing good coming from that. That's pure destruction. Mother Teresa, in her orphanages and her care facilities, above each door would have the phrase "I thirst." I
Mm-hmm.
thirst, right? To think of Jesus on the cross, right? Jesus is suffering on the cross. This is the one king who came into the world to suffer and sacrifice, to give up his body for the sins of others. So again, there haven't been many people like this in history that have taken it to the level of being stigmatists, and they don't choose to become stigmatists. That's a gift that's given to
Hmm.
them. And it might seem like, wow, some gift, right? To be in this pain where you're bleeding from your hands. And a lot of them, Padre Pio, others, I'm sure if someone said to them, "Would you like the Lord to take it away?" He'd say, "Yeah, this really hurts, and
Right.
I don't feel worthy of it, but for whatever reason, God has given it to me to carry."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really powerful to think about that combination too of saying, I'd like for it to be gone. I don't feel worthy of it, but still here you are, given this opportunity to suffer, and just that total 180, right? That total flip of seeing suffering as a gift, as an opportunity to grow. I try to think about it in such small, minor ways. I could be such a baby when I get a head cold, or
Right. Me too.
my
Yeah.
back's hurting for a day or something like that,
Right.
but it goes back to, I think, something you said at the beginning too, of just you're much more, I would say, fruitful bedtime reading than mine sometimes. But just reading the lives of the saints, which is going to be, both in the intro to this episode and at the end, my greatest encouragement to people to read the book, is because that's also been so impactful for me. And I think that you get to see the greats, right? When you see, just like when I used to play basketball, I loved watching Kobe highlights and Dwayne Wade highlights and LeBron highlights and Derrick Rose and Carmelo Anthony. That's what I think the lives of the saints do for us. And they help you when you're dealing with your little baby cross and you see St. Catherine's say, yeah,
Yeah.
give me this, put the holes in my hands. I'll take it for the
Right.
suffering of the world, because my heart is literally your heart, Jesus. That was an amazing story there as
Yeah, that's a
well.
good comparison, right? So these are physical heroes in a different way, right?
Yes.
Unlike Kobe and NBA stars and NFL stars. It's interesting too. I laugh because I'm a baby too when it comes to suffering, and it's my wife is better at it than I am. And you'll often hear women say to their husbands, like, "You're such a wimp," right?
Yeah.
And the vast majority of stigmatists have been women. And there's been a little bit of research on that, and some commentary and observations made about it by different church officials. And one of the ones I quote in the book said, "Well, women are just they're stronger lovers. They're more about
Mm.
sacrifice. They're more about self-sacrifice. They're more willing to sacrifice." When our kids, we have 8 kids, and when they were babies, 2 o'clock in the morning, crying or needing something, and my wife and I are both laying in bed, she just jumps right up, man. She just jumps right up and bolts into the other room. I'm sitting there, shut up, get the kid quiet, right?
Right.
Let me go back to sleep. But she gets up right away, takes care of the kid, walking around all night. And I think that there's a motherly element of it that makes women perhaps more willing to do it than men. Another interesting commonality that we've seen with a number of them have died at the age of 33.
Hmm.
A number of the female stigmatists. That was the case of Catherine of Siena. That was the case of Saint Faustina. That's the age of Christ, when Christ died on the cross. So there's many areas of kinship that the different stigmatists have had with Christ. Another
Yeah.
is wrestling with demons, and that's you'll read the case. I did a full chapter on Saint Gemma Galgani. If people don't know about Gemma Galgani, born 1878, died 1903, 25 years old. She is an amazing saint, canonized, not many years after her death, and invoking the phrase about Saint Joseph, terror of demons. I call her
Mm.
terror of demons, and she really suffered. Most of the attacks by the devil and demons against stigmatists, against someone like Padre Pio, it usually happens to men. But to hear the case of like this 18, 20-year-old girl being dragged across the floor by her hair by a demon, I mean, she's somebody who was prepped in life to do battle with the forces of evil. I think now, as an intercessor after death, as a canonized saint. And I quote a number of different exorcists who've said that that the one saint that will come and accompany them when they're doing a particularly tough exorcism more often than the other is Gemma Galgani.
Really.
And in one case, one of the demons says, Oh, it's her, the one in black. I hate her. She's disgusting. And the exorcist will say, "Who is it?" Thinking that it's the Blessed Mother. And the demon will say, "It's her. It's Gemma. I hate her. Saint Gemma. I hate her." But here's somebody who was prepped in life, died at the age of 25, and then would go on in life or after life as an intercessor in heaven to battle against those same demons in a way where now she always has the upper hand.
Yeah. Wow. And were most of the obviously 90% were women, were most of the female stigmatists, were they religious sisters, the vast majority?
Yeah, it's off and on. It's kind
Mm.
of some of them were lay people. Some of them wanted to become sisters and then never got to that point, never made it to that point.
Yeah.
Uh, Gemma Galgani, for example, Catherine of Siena became, I guess, what today would be called a third order Dominican. She was part of the Mantellate, as they were called. They were known for their mantle and what they wore, and the habit that they wore, and the color, and the white and the black. The Some of the men as well. Now, Francis was obviously the founder of the Franciscans. Padre
Sure.
Pio was a Capuchin friar. In fact, his original name was Francesco Forgione. So he was, and interestingly, 70% of the stigmatists that we know of have been Italian. So Italy has been home to that. There's more Italian saints than probably any other place. More
Hmm.
recently, Nathan, in the last few decades, and even in the last 100 years, it's diversifying, where you're seeing a decreasing number from traditional countries like France, Germany, and Italy. And I think this reflects the secularism in those countries. And now we're
Yeah.
seeing more from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America, places where the church has been spreading. So that's become consistent with Hilaire Belloc said the faith is Europe is the faith and the faith is Europe. Well, Europe isn't very strong on the faith anymore. Now it's gone.
Yep.
It's gone east. It's gone south, and a lot of the stigmatists there are coming from that area as well. And I should note, Sister Agnes, the seer of Our Lady of Akita, who just passed away a few weeks ago, she had stigmata at one point,
Oh, really?
and she gave the famous 1973 prophecies, Our Lady of Akita. She did not die with the stigmata, as far as we know. I think she probably didn't have them in the last decades of her life. But we also don't know much about what was going on in her convent in her final years. So maybe she might have had something that we don't know about. But
Hmm.
but her bishop affirmed that when she was having those revelations, those prophecies, she had the stigmata.
Wow. That's amazing. And so let's get to that next part of some of the prophecies, the revelations, the warnings portion of it. We kind of open with that, kind of teasing it out and talking a little bit about that. But what are some of the things that you find most striking about what the stigmatists, and whichever ones you want, however far back you want to go, but the things they warn about in the future of the church and
Yeah,
society?
boy. So Our Lady of Akita, Sister Agnes, she was one who had these incredible prophecies in 1973 about bishops fighting bishop, about kind of end times visions. The Saint Faustina, who died in 1938 at the age of 33, so she was born in 1905, and she's the one. She was the first canonized saint of the new millennium, and she was told by Jesus. You can see this all through her diary, and I quote it in the chapter on her. I quote it again to repeat it in the conclusion of the book. And Jesus said to her, "You will prepare the world for my second coming," and
Mm.
talks about days of darkness. So many of these stigmatists had visions of 3 days of darkness. I do a whole chapter in this little nun from Calabria named Sister Elena Aiello, who died in the early 1960s. She's not a saint; she's a blessed, as is Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, and she had these, I mean, shocking prophecies about fireballs from the sky, the end times. It's pretty chilling. It's pretty stark. It's pretty dramatic. And I'm not trying to scare anybody with these things in the book, but several of these stigmatists have had these visions of days of darkness, fire from the sky, end times, Armageddon, and one of the reasons I did the book was to kind of sort through these on my own and to try to find out, okay, I know this website that seems a little crazy. I know they're claiming that this lady said this. Did she really? And, they follow the links, and I don't know, this isn't sourced very well. Where are they getting this stuff? So as a scholar, right, somebody who's, an academic, I've written, I guess, over 20 books. I want to know myself. I want to know where they're getting that information. I want to know if that's something, if there's a little nun from Calabria that's predicting a fireball from the sky and this and that, which all sounds like historically, like what she's talking about, especially past predictions that have already come true. Some of this seems feasible. Some of it seems possible. I want to know if she actually said that. So a lot of my writing these chapters and doing these investigations was to come to my own peace of mind and conclusion and understanding of what's fiction and nonfiction. So I separate all of that in the book. I go through it in the book, and it's kind of scary. We could well be living through these end times. I think we are, frankly.
You do believe so?
When exactly will they happen? This fall, next year, 10 years, 20, 30 years? We don't know the time and the place. But according to the predictions of some of these people, especially Faustina, it can't be that far away. It just can't.
Right. Yeah. Powerful. And how do you see, going back to The Devil and Karl Marx, one of your most popular books, and that kind of theme of leading into the end times, do you think, with that in mind, especially you thinking that it's near, do you think there's any chance of us kind of like turning things around, winning things back in America when it comes to culture, politics, that kind of stuff? What's kind of your general approach to that? Optimism, lack of optimism, realism? Tell me about where you kind of stand.
I'm
bringing things back.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Hell in a handbasket. I mean, I think we're toast. And I'm the one person that I wrote more on than anybody else is Ronald Reagan. I've done like 8 books on Ronald Reagan. I had to count them recently. Yeah, because the Reagan the movie with Dennis Quaid is based on one of my books on Ronald Reagan. Reagan was the quintessential optimist, the faith-based optimist, right? God works everything out for a divine plan according to the best. Talked about America as a shining city on a hill.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we're a shining city on a hill anymore. I don't think any country is a shining city on a hill. Chesterton said, hope is about having hope when things seem hopeless. I know as Christians, we're supposed to have faith, hope, and charity. We're supposed to have hope. But my only hope really is in Jesus, in the church, and that God will eventually make all things right. But in the meantime, I don't have any hope of turning any of this around as a culture and a country other than the second coming of Christ. And really, that's the message of the Stigmatists as well. So at some point, it's going to get a whole lot worse before it gets any better. And I think we're probably in the period of where it's just going to get worse and worse.
Yeah.
How's that?
That's great. No, I think that's should we just close there? No, one more. Yeah. Well, I have 2 more questions for you. We'll end with the Reagan one. But my next question is just kind of about, when it comes to personal holiness and, seeking excellence, I have these 7 pillars that I teach people about, and we try to, get after it in life and get a lot done while keeping the most important thing in our faith and Christ at the center of our lives. But allowing that to influence our relationships, our friendships, our professional life, our financial management, our fitness, all these kinds of things, learning. And so for you seem, from what I can understand, to be quite busy. So I want to know, with 8 kids, the movie's coming out, you're writing 20 books somehow, you have a full-time job. Tell me a little bit about how do you kind of manage all of that, doing so many different things and keeping Jesus at the center of all of it?
Yeah. So management and discipline is a big part of it. Another thing that's fortunate is I love all the things that I do. So
Sure.
I actually enjoy these things. I think you said fitness. Fitness is part of it. I make sure I exercise every day. And so if the stress builds up from too much going on, and in fact, just this morning, Nathan, I had so many emails and stuff to go through, and from like 7:30 till about 11:30, I'm just going like this, man. And I didn't go to the gym today because I had pretty good workouts the last 2 or 3 days. I had class at 1:00. I had to leave at 12:30. I had to get in the shower. So I just kind of walked around the yard. I did a Divine Mercy chaplet, got some sun on my face and my body, started a rosary, and said, man, I need to work out. I don't have time. So I just like banged out 50 push-ups, right? So, and then, and then I said, I'm doing more, right? And then I did like another 10, another 10. But even something like that, the kind of fitness is really important. It helps you blow off stress, steam, and really is good for kind of mind, body, and soul. So that's part of it. So taking care of yourself is a big part of it. And then what you read, what you focus on. I will often escape over to the tabernacle of the church and just spend some time with the Eucharist. Not as much as I should, though. I'd like to do that every day. I'd like to do it once or twice a week. Sometimes I don't even do that.
Mm-hmm.
But also, too, and this is good advice for you and others, you got to learn when to say no. I've become much better at that. So I will tell people, I've had in the last 4 or 5 years, people say, could you do a book on this? And wow, I'd love to do a book on that. But
Right.
I'm working on 3 other books right now. I can't. No, I can't. Got a call last week. Can you come out to this place in Dallas, Texas to do a talk before the screening of the Reagan film? I know that sounds cool, but no, I can't. I just can't do it. So that's part of it, knowing what to say yes to and what to say no to.
Yeah, that's a big one, I think. One of my favorite podcasters out there, he always says the greatest productivity hack is the word no.
Yeah.
And that's something I'm learning about in my life, because I feel like I'm kind of in that phase now, much, much smaller scale, but still just getting asked, even just things at church and the high school stuff we were talking about before we got started with football programs and coaching basketball and all these different things. And I'm like, okay, all of those are good, but I have to stay focused at least occasionally.
I would also tell you, the Lord said, keep Sunday the day of rest.
Yeah.
Don't work on Sunday.
Yep.
I've tried not to work on Saturdays, although I'll get up in the morning and I'll write a little bit, but that's enjoyable to me, right? It's almost
it's more like a hobby. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And in the evenings, I try not to work in the evenings. I try not to do media interviews and I would tell people, no, I need to be done by 6 with that. I mean, sometimes I have lectures in the evening and I'll do that, but otherwise I try to evening, dinner time, have a couple glasses of wine, spend time with my family, wash dishes, read a book, maybe even watch some TV. But you have to wind down at that point.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's great. Well, in the last couple of minutes here, tell us, one, just how excited are you for the Reagan movie, rolling out here? But what was that kind of process like? Or just tell us, give us some excitement about the movie. We can't wait to see it.
Oh man, I could talk a lot more. I could talk for at least an hour about that.
I bet.
Yeah, but that goes back. Yeah, that goes back to 2004 when I did my first book, Gone on Ronald Reagan. And Mark Joseph, who's the producer for the film, called me from the Rock River in Dixon, Illinois, and said, I just read your book. I love this. This is the book I always wanted to read about Reagan. I knew Reagan had this deep spiritual side. People said that he didn't. Has anybody talked to you about movie rights for the book? And I said, no one has. And I told him, I said, I'm working on another book right now on Reagan. It's called The Crusader, Ronald Reagan and the Fall of Communism. I said, believe it or not, the Soviets called him the Crusader. They kind of mocked him. It's kind of a neat thing. And I said, Mark, that book actually begins with Reagan at the Rock River, where you are right now, as a lifeguard. And Nathan, in the film, so Dennis Quaid plays Reagan. The young Reagan lifeguard is played by David Henry.
Yep.
Who's a really solid, great Catholic guy. And he's great as Reagan the lifeguard. So I told Mark, I said, that lifeguard, for 7 summers, 7 days a week, he rescued the lives of 77 people as a lifeguard. And this gave Reagan his appreciation for the sanctity and dignity of human life, the idea, the confidence that he could rescue people, that he could play world saver. In so many ways, this is a metaphor for what he did in the Cold War to take on atheistic, diabolical, murderous, over 100 million dead Soviet communism. So that led to the books. So that book became the basis of the film. And we spent from 2004 to 2024, 20 years trying to raise the money, trying to get the film made. When we got Dennis Quaid around 2021, that finally sealed the deal. And when you see the movie, Dennis Quaid is great as Reagan. Penelope Ann Miller is fantastic as Nancy Reagan. She does a great job as Nancy. John Voight does a great job as Victor, the KGB agent. So it's really quite good. I mean, people are going to be really surprised. I think they'll be surprised at just how good the film is.
That's amazing.
You'll laugh and you'll cry a number of times, for sure.
That's great. I love it. Well, Paul, thank you again. I know you're busy, so I appreciate your time. Thanks for, all your writing. I mean, I told my wife that we were talking about this, and she was talking about books of yours that she read during her time in D.C. She interned on Capitol Hill for a summer.
Oh.
She was talking about reading some of your stuff. So,
wow, I'd like to meet her sometime.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah, but great chatting with you. And just encourage everybody. I hope that today was as fruitful for them as it was for me. But a number of great books by Paul here, but the Stigmatists is a great place to start for those of you going deeper in your faith life and looking to learn more about the lives of some great saints. So thank you again, Paul, and God bless you and the rollout of the Reagan movie.
Thanks, and God bless you, Nathan, and all the good work you're doing. Take care.